Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this month's HBCU Learning Collaborative. To kick us off, I would like to get started with welcoming remarks from Dr. Vernell DeWitty. Dr. DeWitty, please take it away.
Thank you so very much, Jasmine, and it's my pleasure to be with you this afternoon once again and welcome you to the October HBCU Learning Collaborative. On behalf of the leadership and the staff at the Center to Champion Nursing in America, I thank all of you for taking time from what are very busy schedules, but to take time and join us for this very important discussion. The Future of Nursing Campaign for Action is happy to bring today's webinar focused on fostering mental health and well-being among students and faculty. Before we go much further, I would like to point out that today's webinar is being recorded. Therefore, if you miss a section or if you would like to pass it along to a colleague, you will be able to find the recording by going to www.campaignforaction.org/webinar. And it is now my honor and privilege to introduce today's presenter. To save time, I will not read her full biography, but you received information about her in the email invite that you received, and information will also be available on the website along with today's recording. Our keynote presenter is Dr. Bridget Bronner, who is the Associate Professor of Nursing at the University of Pennsylvania School of Nursing. She is chair of the American Nurses Association Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration National Advisory Committee, and she is the founder and CEO of Dr. Bridget Executive Consulting, LLC. Thank you for joining us today. And now, Dr. Bronner, please take this away and do the presentation.
Thank you so much, Dr. DeWitty, for that introduction. Thank you for those who are on. I'm really thrilled and excited to be here, even if only virtually, with you today. And I'm looking forward to this topic, what we're going to cover, and then having a chance to really interact and dialogue with you when we get toward the end of the presentation. So for today's content, we are going to discuss some of the challenges that we're facing in these unprecedented times. And I feel like I will definitely be preaching to the choir, right? I don't need to tell you what is difficult and what the things are that are giving us a hard time right now, because there are multiple. But we can look at these along with the implications that they have for different areas of our lives. We will describe the mechanisms that we can use to support students in this current climate and take a particular emphasis on looking at the difference between sponsorship and mentorship and how we need to lean a little bit more towards sponsorship in this season. We're also going to identify some practical strategies that you can use to promote your own health, your own wellness, but then also foster that among your students. And we'll be looking at that from the perspective of modeling. I can't tell you how many times I have talked to students and they're like, I don't want to be a faculty member. I don't want to be a dean, because they see our lives. And I guess we're walking around looking crazy or chaotic or something. I'm not sure, but it isn't anything that's appealing. And so I hope that, we can work to get our own houses in order first, and that as we do that, we are positively modeling for our students. And then we'll round out the end with a Q&A. And there, again, I'm really excited to hear from you, to hear your questions. Maybe you have things that are already working well that you've been doing at your institutions or in other areas of life. And so I would love to hear that too. And as we go along, you can put your questions and comments in the chat as well. And then when we're done, the moderators will be able to bring that up. So if I say something, it's, while it's fresh in your mind, feel free to put it in the chat, and then we can get to that. So when we think about, the year of 2020, I think we need to like cue some very dreadful music because there's just so much that's happened in this calendar year, and I don't know about you, but it feels like we're living through multiple decades at once. Like we're in October, we're 10 months into one year, and it feels like we're 10 years into the same year. And while much of it has been, very heavy, almost like an unbearable weight, on a brighter note, at the same time, we are truly making history, right? The decisions that we're making on a daily basis will and are altering the course of our future. So my hope for us is that we choose wisely so that in the end, the world is going to be a better place because of our actions. And I've heard some people say that, the benefit right now of being older is that they've survived, right? Like they have lived through so many different ugly and dark moments in this world. And so as a result of that, they are more resilient and they feel better equipped to make it through these times. But then I've also heard other people say, well, no, because I'm older, I have lived through so much, it is wearying that we are not farther along. And so we want to be mindful of how in these times, right, in this year in particular, it is uncharacteristic of anything any of us have ever experienced before, including our students. And so we want to be mindful of how things have changed and how they're different. As we think about these challenges, and that like buzzword now that we're living through unprecedented times, I don't know about you, but this image right here really resonated with me when I think about the current challenges. It's like, I feel like I've been thrust into a game, and someone failed to give me the playbook. They just put me on the court, they threw me out there on the field and they said, hey, go win this championship for us, not really knowing whether to go forward, right, left, stop, who to pass to. And when I was thinking it through, I said, but you know what? Even if someone could have given us a manual for this, I don't know that it would have helped us to navigate these murky waters, right? There's just so much going on so soon, so fast. And for many of us, our students especially, we may not have lived experience, right? Like we may not have this like history, this store, this reserve that we can draw from to help us deal with so much chaos and unrest at once. And some of the challenges that we're facing are this like constant bombardment with trauma and stress, right? It almost feels like it is never ending. And so whether it is TV, social media, even to conversations with loved ones, it's like the predominant narrative is that Black, Indigenous, and other people of color are dying unnecessary deaths. And where this one really resonates with me is not only are we dying unnecessary deaths, but this is at the hands of those who are supposed to protect and care for us. So whether it is scrolling through social media and seeing another video of police brutality, or being on the phone with a loved one who's just got diagnosed with coronavirus, it's this constant bombardment and this constant narrative where we're being traumatized over and over again. On top of that, we're finding that our resources, right, are strained. And that's in every sense of the word. Our financial resources, our educational resources, our emotional resources, right? Like everything that we would typically have at our disposal to be able to move forward and thrive and succeed, we no longer have that. Staff turnover is high. For the work that we need to do, budgets are cut, right? People's emotional bandwidth is shortened. And so we find ourselves yet again in a position where we're being asked to do more with less. Now, I am a native New Yorker, grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and I joke, to say I know how to make $1 out of 15 cents, right? So we know hustle, we know struggle, we know how to make things work. But is it really fair that we, now are in a position where we're expected to stay at the same level of productivity, right? The same level of getting things done when we're operating on less resources. We're operating at, lower capacity for the things that we would need to get things done. And so this straining of resources is creating a huge challenge in our current climate. We also find ourselves being sandwiched in the multiple roles that we play, right? Traditionally, when we heard this term sandwich, it meant caring for an aging loved one, while we were raising small families. And now you can add to that being a dean, being a faculty member, being staff, being a student, while also simultaneously being tech support, dining services, a teacher's aide, all of these things for children who are in virtual school. I have a 10-year-old son, and, he's not even like a toddler or, in kindergarten, but there are still things throughout the day while he's in school that I'm having to do. And so there's that constant, pull and tug in multiple directions. Or maybe the sandwiching is feeling sandwiched between having to sit through a class or a committee meeting. And let's be truthful, some of these meetings can be emails, right? But like you're trying to be present and focus in that same space while at the same time you're wondering if your loved one will make it off the ventilator, after a COVID decline, or you're wondering what's going to happen if your contract is not renewed for you to continue teaching at your institution. So that vice grip, that pressure of just feeling like we're under so much scrutiny and so much intensity and being sandwiched between all of that. And if that was not overwhelming enough, right, there is also this overwhelming sense of uncertainty. We don't know who's going to be the next leader of the United States. We don't know what will happen if our enrollment at our institutions drops, right? We are unclear where the state of our economy even is going to be. And so with this uncertainty, with this constant sense of not knowing what is coming next, it's almost like you can't fully exhale, right? Like you walk around in this posture of just holding your breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop because you aren't sure what's coming next. And as we think about those things, not only are they stressful to sort of think about and consider and have to deal with, but they have major implications for our lives. Not just our health, but other areas of life as well. And so we want to address some of these challenges for the sake of addressing them. But I want to highlight 4 key things that should really motivate us to want to do that all the more. The first one being that, the stress that we're under is literally making us sick, right? There are many of us who are on now who have different chronic conditions and autoimmune diseases because of the stress and the pressure and, the constant toxicity that we're experiencing in our neighborhoods, in our homes, on our jobs. And for me, what is fascinating, and not in the sense of, like excitement, but just blows my mind, is we know from the fields of epigenetics that as this stress attacks our body and alters our DNA, that is even transmitted in utero, right? So these things, when we're seeing what's happening on television and we're listening to things on the radio and we're watching things happen on our campuses and in our communities, it is altering us all the way down to the cellular level. And that change is getting passed forward to future generations. So it's not something that we, can just continue to ignore or not do anything about. And we're going to have this both and model where, while at the same time we advocate for systemic change, we also have to take care of ourselves so that we can be well. And I do want to make a note and put a pin here that it is not that we are, inherently predisposed to illness and disease because of this social construct of race, right? Or because of the amount of melanin that we have in our skin. But instead, when we're seeing hypertension, when we're seeing lupus, when we're seeing, diabetes and these other issues, what we're seeing is the legacy of centuries of oppression, right? We're seeing the fact that people controlled and still continue to control our ability to live or be killed. We're seeing that people had the ability to control our earning potential and what that did, for generational financial situations in our families. We're seeing that the fact that not hundreds of years ago, but just decades ago, people even could control when and where we could go to the bathroom. Like those types of things matter. and they get absorbed into our bodies and absorbed into our systems, and they make us sick. And in the interim of redressing all of that, right, like until we get those things fixed, we really have to be on it for ourselves. If we don't save us, if we don't help ourselves, no one else is going to do it. And so we want to advocate to, address those injustices, but then also actively work to do what we can to restore our health and help others do the same as well. Another area that gets affected is our productivity, right? It's decreased because we were not created to handle all of these things on our own. For myself personally, I am a Christian woman, and I can tell you truthfully, if it were not for my faith, I literally do not know where I would be right now. There's just way too much going on in personal life and work life within my own body, right? Like all these different things. And so if you don't have something that you can sort of like lean on, if you don't have a source, something that you are tapping into to help you make it over, it's going to be challenging. And what's interesting, especially, for us, I'll say for my people, right? We will like push through everything. That's our narrative. That's our default mechanism, that when hard times come, things have to get done. And so by hook or by crook, we're going to make it happen. But guess what? That's not always the best strategy. And in fact, you're going to continue to find decreased productivity if you don't listen to your body. When you're tired, when you're getting headaches, when you find yourself, not being as like gracious or temperate as you normally are with people, if you keep pushing your body when it's up against a wall, you will actually accomplish less than if you gave yourself that rest. If you took that moment to hit the pause button so that you could reset. As you are looking at different areas of your life, I love this graphic with the shapes, right? Because we have the circle, the diamond, the square, and they're not the same shape, but yet they're still related. And so what's happening in our lives, there are things that we may not even associate with the current climate, but they're still affecting our ability to navigate all of the different stressors in our lives. And so I'll give you an example, right? You're in a meeting, and there's a microaggression that happens, and you don't get a chance to do anything after that meeting to sort of like get that energy, get that negative occurrence off of you. And so then you go home, and home is in disarray. There's dishes in the sink, socks are all over the floor. Someone is, texting or calling, and you're just exhausted. And so you're frustrated now at home. And then the next day, the arguments that started at home, they follow you to the classroom. And so you're in the classroom and you feel like the students aren't engaging, they aren't really paying attention, or you have, someone that there's been contention between the two of you for a while, and it seems like it always plays out on the stage in class. And then now fast forward, you get to Thursday, you get to Friday, you're sitting in front of your computer and you're just staring at the screen, right? Looking at that to-do list and unmotivated. So the paper, that manuscript that needs to be finished and uploaded, the grant application, that you were hoping to get out to your co-investigators, the data that you needed to analyze, the advisee meeting that you have to go through and coordinate schedules to set up. All of those things are struggling to get done because you have all of these kinks in the chain, right? All of the ways that the gears are coming and connecting together, and you haven't had an opportunity to get release. And on top of all of this, right, if all of these three things that we've already talked about weren't enough, the load is not equally distributed. So with our strained resources, with the challenges that we're experiencing, before maybe there were 5 people doing the work of 10, now you have 2 people trying to do the work of 50, right? And so you're going to have high turnover, you're going to have high burnout, and then the cycle will just continue cycling back through all of these things, from affecting health and decreasing productivity and manifesting in other areas of life, and then having less individuals who are a part of that and able to contribute to making things different. And as we've looked at this has just been from our perspective, right? As faculty members, as deans. But what does this mean when we think about supporting students in this current climate? You know, these are the perspectives of what we're seeing in the academy, but our students are facing similar battles. And even though they have similar battles, there's also some unique challenges that they're up against. And for us, you know, what we have to remember is just like on the airplane, you have to put on your own mask before you can help anyone else. But guess what? Our mask is not on if we're still trying to do business as usual. If we're longing for those days, you know, the days of old, if we're trying to get back to quote unquote normal, if we can't wait for things to be how they were before, we're actually missing this moment. You know, this current climate has literally changed the world and life as we know it. And so we can either adapt to that and then find new ways to thrive, or we'll be trapped by what was, and then we'll end up staying stuck there and unable to move forward. And I want us to think that through. You know, survival, that's a basic instinct. We don't want to just be in a position where we're surviving and our students are surviving. We want to be able to thrive, right? Like we want to be able to live well through these things, but we can't do that if we're trying to do things that we did in January of this year, you know, or March of 2015. We can't. The climate has changed. And how you show up for yourself, for your colleagues, for your students, you know, anybody that you interact with right now, it's not only affecting your relationships with those individuals and even your relationship with yourself, but also the areas of nursing, right? And the areas of the world that are going to be engaged down the line. And so we want to make sure that we're not doing business as usual and that we're really doing what we need to do to be responsive to the current climate. One of the ways that we can do this is thinking through, you know, this pivotal sort of controversial question here of thinking about whether we actually need mentorship or sponsorship, right? When you think about the best ways to support your students, I want to take a moment to emphasize the critical distinction between these two. And as we do this, take a second to think about, you know, these questions that I'm going to ask, and you can feel free to type in the chat as I ask them. But how many of you have had a mentor? You know, and you can type, I've had a mentor, you can type the number that you've had, but how many of you have had a mentor at any point, high school, you know, undergraduate, graduate, even now while you're in your academic position? So we can think about the mentoring side. And then how many of you have had a sponsor? Yes, I see several people saying they've had many meaningful mentors. They've had them and they still have several. They've had them for their first position. Absolutely. Now, how many have had a sponsor? So not just a mentor, but a sponsor. Okay, and then some have had a mentor for multiple areas of life, nursing, parenting, being a student. Some are saying that they've never had a sponsor. Someone else had a sponsor, but not a mentor, and found that person to be helpful. And someone else that they think they have had one, but they're have not called it a sponsor. Absolutely, right? And so there's a distinction between the two, but many of us aren't even aware that there's a difference between mentorship and sponsorship. And someone else just shared that they've had many mentors and fewer sponsors. Yes, that actually is the position that many of us have been in. We've had mentors, but not sponsors. And so I want to highlight for you the difference between the two so that we can see kind of where we may need to step up as faculty and deans, because it's going to matter not only for our lives, but also for our students. So mentorship, in essence, provides guidance, advice, role modeling, you know, even emotional support. And I am confident that many of you who are on now have been amazing mentors. There are probably young people who are even in nursing school, you know, because of what you've done for them and how you've poured into their life and the way that you, you know, talk them through circumstances and help them with applications. So we've nailed that part, right? We have that part down. And just as you were sharing in the chat, we're familiar with mentorship because we've had mentors, so we can identify and recognize that. But where where we are having some challenges, right? Where we're not on equal playing field with our peers who are not racial and ethnic minorities is when it comes to sponsorship. And where sponsorship is distinct is that you are leveraging, your power, your resources, the things that you have at your disposal to advocate for others. That might be your professional networks. It might be adding them as a co-investigator to your grant. But in essence, you are helping to give them opportunities and ventures that they would not have been able to secure on their own. And I really want to highlight that there, and someone else had in the chat that the sponsor created the opportunity. Through sponsorship, you are using your position, and this is typically someone who is senior, right? Your social position, your academic position, sitting on the boards that you sit on. This is where someone invites you to do a keynote address, and you say, you know what, I have 1,000 of those on my CV, and so I'm going to pass that along, to someone who is more junior. Or you have a student who's expressed interest in becoming a faculty member. And so you find ways for them to start serving on academic committees within the school, that have student representation. But you are best positioning your students through sponsorship so that they can reach their goals. And it's putting them on par with their peers from other groups. So what has happened, and I'll speak particularly from the Black African American context, with these historical injustices, right? You're even at HBCU because with segregation and with when they tried to integrate, we didn't even have the same type of educational opportunities that other people had. And so we're now in a position trying to play catch up in many ways, so that we can do the best for future generations. But we started, we didn't have as much time, I guess is what I'm trying to say, as other groups have had. So where they have literally, 2 centuries, 3 centuries of having individuals leading the torch and carrying the mantle and championing different issues, we didn't have those same levels of influence. And what's interesting, and I appreciate those of you who, have been around much longer than what I have, but you lived through the times where even after they opened the door for you, it had clauses and caveats to it. So you could get in because you were one of the quote unquote good ones, but you dare not try to bring anybody else in with you, right? And so with that happening, we're now in a position where we don't have the same opportunities to give to other people, but we're starting to build that. We're building our networks. We're making it so that not only are we waiting for seats at the table, but we're creating tables where they don't exist for us, and demanding to have a place in positions of power and authority where decisions are made. And so it's not that, we're choosing one or the other, or that we don't have to do both mentorship and sponsorship. But I just want to encourage and challenge each of us, myself included, that sponsorship is really where we need to invest more of our time and our resources moving forward. And you can be strategic, right? As you're doing both, about who you will be a mentor for versus who you will sponsor. And depending on where you are in your career, you may be able to mentor one person in this area, but you might not be able to be their sponsor because you haven't gotten, far enough along in your career, or vice versa. The key, though, is that as we look at building and diversifying our nursing workforce, we got to really think about, are we preparing, right? Are we adequately preparing our students for the world of the future? If we are still teaching the exact same curriculum, that we've been teaching, if we are still going over the exact same topics and talking to them about the exact same nursing positions, I think we're going to miss the mark because the world has changed. So the way we even envision nursing has to change. What are we doing for succession planning? For those who are deans and department chairs and running different labs, how are you preparing and grooming that next generation to take your position? Are they connected in the appropriate networks so that they can thrive as charge nurses, as principal investigators, as members of Congress? How are we making and creating opportunities and using the resources at our disposal to ensure that they are best prepared for their future? So now that we've sort of seen what we're up against, looked at how it affects us, thought through with the world changing, how we may even need to reposition the way we look at our interactions with our students. The psych nurse in me, wants to make sure that we don't leave things on doom and gloom and that we get into some practical nitty gritty, right? Like that so what moment. As an interventionist, I'm always looking like, okay, we've talked about all of these different things, but now what do we do with this information, right? And as nurses, we are so excellent. Like we win the gold, platinum, whatever medal for taking care of everyone and everything else. But then who takes care of us? Right? Who is really the person who's there for us at the end of the day after we've done everything and completed and accomplished everything that needed to be done. And then when you compound that with being a Black man or a Black woman, Black individual in the United States, we feel the weight of the world on our shoulders. And not only do we feel it, but we've somehow bought into the myth that we are superhuman. The whole Black girl magic and invincibility, like we are not superhuman. We cannot carry these things on our own. We have to have help. We have to have support. We have to have outlets. And even as you're attending today, as deans, as faculty for the students who may view this later, you don't only wear the academic hat, right? You're entrepreneurs, you're caregivers, administrators, leaders, clergy, friends, spouses. The list of roles and functions that you play in the lives of other people and even for yourself is endless. So we're going to look at some practical things that you can do to promote your own wellness, but then also model that and then foster wellness among your students. So if I can be my millennial self for a moment, this one, therapy, period. And I would put a T, PERODT on the end of it, right? That if you are trying to navigate everything that is on your plate right now and you do not have a good therapist, you are doing yourself a disservice. There is nothing wrong. It is not a weakness. I know some individuals, once you reach a certain stature, right? Like there are concerns of confidentiality and who will know that you're going, but there are ways to be discreet about that. And even now with us being virtual, you can have, video sessions, telephone sessions. Those were a thing even before the pandemic. But you cannot operate as your best self if you do not have this space. Therapy will help you process, unload, heal from the different things that are happening and going on, as well as get some practical tips and solutions so that you can live well, right? And so my first recommendation as a practical strategy is going to be, if you are not already seeing a therapist, that you will commit to love yourself enough that before the end of this week, you would look into getting connected for therapy. And then different insurance providers over the course of this have even provided free sessions for individuals. So that's something as well if cost is an issue. Next, you have to also set realistic expectations on your time and the time of other people too, right? Like, let's be mindful of that we want to know what we're truly capable of doing, but then also think through what we are asking and expecting of others. There are only 24 hours in a day, right? And you can't spend all of those working. You have to have sleep. You want to at least be trying to get 7 to 8 hours of sleep a night. And I know that sounds foreign to a lot of us, but we have to really revisit our lives because it goes back into that cycle of how we're, sick and getting sick because our sleep schedules are off. One of the key ways that you can make these expectations realistic is by starting to look at your days, your weeks, your months as a whole versus just, like looking at it in smaller chunks so that you can pace yourself and then be strategic about the commitments that you make. So one of the greatest gifts that I gave to myself was starting to color code my calendar so that I can see, what things were for home life, what was for work, what was for travel, which things, would require a little bit more mental energy. And then if I look in a week and I see, for my system, a bunch of burgundy and a bunch of, red, like a deeper red, like this brown and red color, I know that I'm not going to add anything else in that week because it is already going to be emotionally taxing. And so you want to pace yourself in the same way. And remember that and be mindful. I know a lot of what we're doing has, urgent deadlines and quick turnarounds, and things are like rapid fire changing, but we also want to be mindful when we ask other people to do things. Are we giving a realistic time frame? Like, do not email someone at 11 p.m. and then expect that they have seen that, done what you asked, and are ready to respond by 6 a.m. That's a challenge. For facilitating connections, many of us are much better resourced than what we actually realize. What are ways that you and your colleagues can facilitate connections to better support one another so that you're not duplicating efforts? This might be sharing slide decks, holding virtual meetups after work, to socialize, going through tips, to share success stories. There are ways where people who are already in your network are doing some things that can support the work that you need to get done, or maybe they had a challenging situation with a student where there were issues where boundaries weren't appropriately set and lines were crossed, but you experienced that 5 years ago. And so you can help them think through what they can do for the future, and make sure that you're communicating and facilitating connections among each other. And similar to that, you can think more strategically about partnerships within your school, on campus, with neighboring communities, right? Like right now, especially if we think about racism and, all the levels, individual, structural, there are so many people who are like motivated to do things and work right now. So many ways that campuses are trying to be sensitive to the well-being and mental health and needs of students. So what is already happening that you can partner alongside of? We don't have to reinvent the wheel. What's already being done that you can tap into, which is going to help relieve some of the things on your plate, but then also advance the work of what someone else was trying to get done. This one right here is my personal favorite, and like a close second to therapy is spending time in nature. The benefits are endless. We have so many randomized control trials where we see blood pressure being lowered, increase in mental acuity. It's just something about being able to be out in the fresh air, moving around, seeing greenery. And this is something that you are going to have to schedule. We can't just wait for it to magically happen, because it will not happen. It's never going to happen. And we want to be mindful, to try to get that time outdoors. Even as I'm here with you today, I'm in Philly. I live in Philly now, and it's just so dreary out, right? Like, it's dark, it's dreary, it's cloudy, it's been raining all week, and I'm missing my hammock time. This over the course of the pandemic, Amazon has not been my friend. So I've had packages coming just about every day, but I got myself a hammock and I got an inflatable lounger. And when the weather is nice, I just lay out, like laying along the Schuylkill River and watching the birds fly and looking at the water. Like, my happy place is white sand and turquoise waters. And because I can't get that right now, since I refuse to fly, that's my next best thing, right? So what is it for you that the outdoors can do? And how can you, even if you can't get to your ideal place, how can you sort of mimic or mock that right where you are? And for those in areas where, the climate is changing and starting to get colder, or it's more of a challenge to go outdoors, how can you build an indoor practice? What are the ways, whether it's putting on YouTube, Spotify, Pandora, Apple Music, listening to rain sounds, listening to a babbling brook or ocean waves or birds chirping, whatever those things are that help to ground you, doing yoga, meditating, if you don't already have essential oils, getting a diffuser, just something that can help you while you have to be indoors, have those same benefits and effects of getting to spend that time in nature. And this one is last but not least, for how you can sort of promote your own wellness, is to nurture your passions. We do an amazing job at professional development. When it comes to academics and career, like, we're on it. We will sign up for the seminars. We will join the collaboratives. We will do the CEUs. But what about the other aspects that make us us? The things that we're passionate about. We want to make sure that we're developing those as well. So, are you a fiction writer? Do you love adult coloring? does building or fixing things bring you joy, you want to make sure that you have time where you are nurturing and investing in those things as well, because if not, your life will be out of balance. And that slide where we had the implications, all of that starts again, from health to productivity to relationships. And you may say, well, you know what, Bridget, I don't have a passion. I haven't found that hobby. I don't know what that thing is that sort of helps to refill my cup and keep me going. Well, there's no time like the present to try to figure that out. You can for those of you who are qualitative researchers, you can do a free listing activity where you say, what makes me happy? What brings me joy? What, if I've had a stressful day, what helps to calm me down? And then you can begin to nurture that as your passion. And again, if we have students who end up viewing this later, these are great strategies for you to follow as well. They're universal in their application and in their benefits. So as we've seen how you in your academic roles can make a difference in doing things to promote your own wellness, how then do we translate that to do something for our students? Well, one of the first things that we're going to have to do is make sure, again, as we're avoiding business as usual, we have to think outside of the box. You can't just take your syllabus, your mentoring style, the ways that you engaged in 2019 and 2018, even January of 2020, and then try to plop them into this fall semester. Things have changed entirely too much, so it's just not going to work. And we want to be mindful that our students are facing as many, if not more, challenges as we are. And many of them, depending on your institution, may not have signed up for virtual learning. And so that's bringing some additional stress and challenges. So we really want to think about how we're engaging them and what we're doing. And one of the ways that we can do that is by re-envisioning the classroom. We can be a tremendous support to those who we are teaching by re-envisioning what the classroom setting is, what it is intended to do and how we operate there. And so we can think about who is learning from us, right? And what are they going to be responsible to do? And that requires us, in a time where we're feeling depleted and probably not, our best and most creative selves, but it's going to require us to be visionary and dream out loud. Some of the questions that you can ask to do this would be, what are the key skills that they will need as they move forward in the profession? How can the material be taught in new and culturally relevant ways, right? When we think about the system of nursing that we've inherited and even how unjust that system itself is, whose voices have been absent, right? Like, who has been writing the textbooks? Who has been determining what nurses need to know? And even if we're, not in like the last quarter of 2020 going to completely implode nursing education, how can we supplement what's already there to make sure that our students are prepared for this new world that we're in? And that includes thinking about whose voices are absent, right? Or maybe even stifled. And that's whether from the literature or in our classrooms. We want to make sure that we have diversity of influence and perspective as we're engaging in this work. The same that you were going to facilitate connections for yourself and, among each other, doing that for students as well, helping them get engaged in broader networks. They need supports to navigate this client. And so maybe there's ways that you can strategically build community within your classrooms, or having small group advising sessions so that they don't feel like they're, on a one-person island and trying to do all these things on their own. And once they have those additional resources, they're also better off. And we have to be mindful, though, that even with all these things, there are missing pieces, right? What they say and even what you see may have an underlying story that is not being shared. The one whose grades, right, are declining because they're in an abusive relationship and they don't know how to leave, or the one whose video and mic are always muted because there's too many people in the background and they're embarrassed, or, many of you have probably had this one, the one who doesn't know how they're going to afford tuition. And so they're ready to drop out of school because the pressure of trying to handle it all is too much. The circumstances that we could go through for this one are endless, but I just want to, really note that one of the ways that we can show up and be there for them is putting on our nursing, like our critical assessment and thinking hats to say, okay, I'm going to be attentive to these other contextual things that may not be said and they may not be readily apparent, but are still affecting my student and their outcomes. As we're trying new things, as we're providing supports and making connections and being sponsors, we also want to have a way where we can measure progress, right? Like so that you can evaluate what's working or what isn't, and then be able to course correct as needed. It's like insanity, and a waste of time if we keep doing something just because it's always been done, especially if what we're doing has no effect. So whether that is through surveys, getting the students together in small groups, just having a way to measure and look at whether or not what you're doing is having the intended effect. And then lastly, remember that whatever you do, it's going to have, an exponential impact. When I think about the thousands, hundreds of individuals who have helped me along my journey to get me to where I am today, even down to being able to present in this webinar and be here with you this afternoon, if even one of those people did not play the role that they played, my trajectory would be completely altered. I would not sit in the seat that I sit in today. And so even if you only engage 5 students, and those 5, each of them engages another 5 people, and it just goes on from there, your impact would be getting to countless people. And if that influence is for good, they can take it and continue to pay it forward. So as we prepare to wrap up here, just a couple of concluding thoughts for you. We are, and I keep hearing and using that word unprecedented times, but it really is. We're just living through something that we have never experienced before. Even if we've had hardship and trauma and strife, these times are just uniquely different. And so in knowing that, we want to make sure that we are being gracious, flexible, and compassionate, and get this not only to other people, but also to ourselves. I think sometimes we do a really great job of being this way, with other individuals, but then we are our own worst critics. We're the hardest on ourselves, and we don't give ourselves the grace, flexibility, and compassion that we need. But I'm going to charge us to make sure that we continue to do that for ourselves and others. Take advantage of available resources. You know how we talked about therapy. There's therapy for Black girls, therapy for Black men. If you go to the Psychology Today website, you can put in your zip code and find a therapist in your location. And then there's also the crisis text line, which is a really good resource for students as well, because sometimes you can't even talk to articulate what's going on, but they can or you can send a text message to get some supports. And then remember that we will make it through this, right? Like, we are overcomers. We are victorious. We survive and thrive. But the key is that we're going to make it through this together. So we want to know that for our institutions, our faculty, our students, our staff, we are all in it together. We may be in it at different places, but we're in it together, and we're going to get through this by working together so that we can promote our mental health, help others to promote their own, and then move forward. And so again, I thank you so much for being here today, and I'm really excited to get into our Q&A portion of the talk.
Okay, thank you so very much, Dr. Bronner, for that outstanding, insightful presentation that was so filled with so many recommendations for taking care of ourselves and as well as taking care of others. And now we're moving into the Q&A portion. And you have some instructions on the screen. You can unmute yourself by pressing #6 to ask a question. Or if you want to add a question or a comment into the chat box, please feel free to do that. You may also raise your hand if you want to ask a question. So we'll give you a couple of minutes and so that you can figure out your preferred mode of connecting with us to ask your question. So as we're waiting, I do have one question, and that is, oftentimes I've heard from many of the deans and the faculty in HBCUs that resources always present one of the greater challenges.
Mhm.
And certainly during these unparalleled times that we're living through, do you have any thoughts or comments or recommendations about how leaders in nursing schools might be able to address the challenges of insufficient resources?
Yeah, it's one of those things, the expression that money makes the world go round, right? And we look at, so like take me for an example, being at UPenn, a predominantly white institution, Ivy League institution, very wealthy institution. And part of that is a product of the families that have come through this system, right? Like who were the individuals who came here for their education, who then went on to become CEOs of these, Fortune 500 companies. And it's not to say that individuals from HBCUs aren't doing that, because they absolutely are. But how I talked about those historical injustices earlier, we know that from an economics perspective, the wealth gap between, we'll stick it to blacks and whites right now for the sake of the example, the wealth gap is huge. And so where, you may have a larger percentage of individuals who are white in a higher income earning bracket, right, and able to donate something like $300 million. I said, like, Lord, what type of job do I need to have where I can donate $300 million? Bless me with that, please. But to be able to do, an endowment in that way, for our HBCUs, we have not had as many individuals in those positions, and it has not been for lack of trying. It is not that they don't exist. We have very recent examples, actually, of billionaires making substantial contributions to, HBCUs, and millionaires making contributions. But I think it comes down to how do we then, knowing that our history has put us in a position where the individuals who would be contributing to HBCUs don't have, the same amount of wealth or the same number of resources as some other individuals might. How do we then sort of circumvent that? To pull those resources and get, the finances to be there. And I think now people are starting to get the importance of the culture and of the environment for learning, for development, for people's growth. And so you have people who did not go to HBCUs who now are like, you know what, instead of putting my money in this pot, I'm going to put it here. Or, individuals deciding to come back and teach at the areas, like at institutions where they went, for their undergraduate degree. So I think it's just a matter of being more strategic to pool the resources that we have, but then also tapping into other buckets and other populations to be able to get those supports too.
Okay, thank you so very much for that.
And I see, nothing from our attendees yet. Does that mean that I did an amazing job and you have no questions? Or even if you have, for those attending, if you have comments for things that have worked well for you, what are ways that you are taking care of yourself, or things that you've done to support mental wellness among your students? I would love to hear that too.
Well, we have a couple of minutes left, not many, but one of the things I wanted to ask you to comment on again, the notion of what we've come to call the diversity tax. And that's where the diverse person in the environment ends up really picking up a lot of the workload, especially as it relates to underrepresented students. The but what I've come to recognize is that sometimes that same kind of behavior takes place in HBCUs and other uh, organizations as well. And
Mm-hmm.
maybe there's a comment that you might make about that and how we might be able to manage that, because sometimes that adds to the stress because of the workload that a few might carry.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. So diversity tax is real. And I think sometimes there's this false assumption that if you are at a HBCU or for our Latinx brothers and sisters at a HSI, that, you know, somehow you no longer have to pay that tax. No, it is absolutely there and it exists where you are then expected to like show up for everything diversity related. And whether that is, you know, students who are having challenges and struggling, or like right now in this climate, everybody wants to, you know, add a diversity, equity, and inclusivity officer, and everyone wants to like build and brand a new course on anti-racism. So there are ways where we are expected to carry a heavier load than our colleagues who don't look like us, and we're expected to carry that on top of already being overtaxed in other areas of life, right? Like if we just look at the pandemic alone right now, we are more likely to have personal knowledge of individuals who have coronavirus. I know 2 people personally who have already died, right? And many more who have tested positive and are either like still sick or have recovered. But yes, that is absolutely real. But I think when we get strategic to say, you know, who is already doing what, how can I partner with things that are already existing? How can we, right, communicate amongst each other to say, hey, you know what, I did a lecture on X. I'm going to send you my slides, or I will send you the recording and you can have your class watch it asynchronous. Then that's one less thing, right, that you have to try to prepare to do when you're already stretched thin. So I think, you know, we're back in this situation and position where no one is coming to save us. We are going to have to save and rescue ourselves, and it's going to be by working together, not being in competition, right, coming alongside one another, and then really sort of like keeping the greater good, right, like the bigger picture in focus. And then I do want to acknowledge from the chat, in case we had people who called in and can't see it. So there's some great things that folks are doing. Someone says that they're going to discuss with faculty about holding sessions for students so that the students can discuss how they're feeling, or just talk about something other than nursing school. And that's so key, because nursing school, just how for us, our classroom time is only one fraction of our lives, their education is only one fraction. So providing that space is going to be powerful. Someone else said, that they try to take time to rest and renew so that they can continue to fight, and they limit the time that they spend with negative persons or with those like doom and gloom spirits, and it works most of the time. Excellent. Oh, the other saying, I made your day. Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, so I'm glad that this was helpful. I see that we're at time now. I look forward, you know, you can follow on Twitter at Dr. BM Bronner. I would love to keep in touch. And yeah, so thank you.
Okay. And as we close, I would like to remind you that the webinar section of the webinar is going to be available on the website campaignforaction.org. And there you'll be able to find the recording as well as a webinar summary and other resources that might be available. Be sure that you follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and do sign up for the bi-weekly Campaign for Action update. So thank you once again, Dr. Bronner, for such an outstanding, timely presentation about maintaining our own health and our mental well-being and that of others. And may you all have a great afternoon. Thank you so much.